They say the worst kind of pain isn't the one you see. It's the kind you have to hide. I thought I had built a good life, a safe life. Then, in one terrifying moment, I saw the truth the foundation was rotten. Quick, unsettling memories flash in my mind. A child's small, trembling hand. The view of a luxurious, intimidating house at night. The sound of shattered peace. And the shadow of a man's stern face. What happens when the people you trust to protect your child are the very ones who bring harm? The danger wasn't lurking in the shadows. It was sitting across the dinner table. And the betrayal, it was just a phone call away. A call that changed everything. If this story touches your soul, subscribe this channel because every day there is a new story that could be yours. Tell us where you are listening from. My son, Leo, is 5. A bright, sensitive boy. My wife, Sarah, and I, we worked hard to give him everything. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. Sarah's family, the Ashworths, they were wealthy, powerful. Her father, Mr. Robert Ashworth, was the kind of man whose disapproval felt like a freezing silence in the room. For years I bit my tongue, walked on eggshells, all for Sarah. Robert's house, that estate, felt less like a home and more like a carefully controlled fortress. We went there every Sunday, a ritual of uncomfortable silence and simmering judgment. The conflict didn't start with a scream, it started with silence. Robert hated noise, especially the joyful, messy noise of a 5-year-old boy. We were sitting at their opulent dining table. Leo was playing quietly under the table. He giggled and a small, wooden toy train rolled out, bumping Robert's highly polished shoe. "Greg, control your son. This is a dining room, not a nursery," Robert said, his voice quiet but deeply unsettling. Sarah quickly jumped in, trying to smooth things over. "Dad, he's just playing. It's fine." I leaned down, my chest tight, whispering to Leo to keep the game quiet. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and trusting. He tried to retrieve his train, accidentally brushing against Robert's shoe again. Robert's jaw tightened. His gaze was pure, icy focus. It happened so fast. There was a sudden, controlled movement from Robert, a low, dismissive sound, and then Leo was simply ... different. He didn't cry out. He just recoiled, a sudden stillness falling over him, and his eyes, they were filled with a profound, stunned terror I had never put there. The sound of his silence was deafening. I immediately pulled Leo onto my lap, shielding him. "What just happened, Robert?" Robert straightened his cuff, completely unbothered. He was being disruptive. He needed a reminder of boundaries. "Don't be melodramatic, Greg." He called it a reminder. But when I got Leo home and lifted his shirt, I saw the undeniable, subtle mark of that interaction. It was the physical manifestation of Robert's cold, controlling nature. My father-in-law had inflicted something profound that day. The fear in Leo's eyes was a question I knew I had to answer. Who was Robert Ashworth, really? And what else was he hiding behind that mask of respectability? Seeing the effect of Robert's actions on my boy changed the game. It wasn't about respecting the family patriarch anymore. It was about war. I looked down at my sleeping son, and in that moment, I knew I had to do something drastic. I had to make a call, the kind of call that, once made, could not be taken back. What kind of call could possibly be so powerful that it could bring down a man who commanded so much fear? The subtle, awful truth of Robert's action against Leo felt like a wound on my own soul. My first instinct was pure, unadulterated fury. I wanted to storm back to that fortress of a house and confront him. But Robert Ashworth wasn't a man you just screamed at and walked away from. Later that night, the fear in our house was palpable. I was in our bedroom, hovering over my phone, struggling with the thought of what to do next. Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed, tearful and incredibly tense. "Look at him, Sarah," I pleaded, the memory of Leo's frozen fear burning in my mind. "Look at what your father did." "I saw it, Greg. I saw his face when it happened," she whispered, her voice cracking with distress. But we can't. We can't accuse him. You know how he is. This was the first hint of suspicion, the first deep crack in the foundation of my marriage. She wasn't prioritizing our son's sense of safety. She was defending the man who had instilled that terror. Defending him, he instilled fear in our boy. I should call the authorities, I insisted, my hand gripping the phone. No, you can't. Sarah shot up from the bed, her eyes wide with true panic. Greg, please, think about the consequences. Dad will ruin us. He'll make sure you never work again. He'll take everything. She wasn't worried about justice for Leo. She was consumed by the fear of her father's power and the destruction of the Ashworth name. This wasn't simple fear. It felt like a silent, terrible agreement she had made long ago to prioritize her family's image above all else. I didn't call the police. Sarah's desperate, near-hysterical pleas had stalled me. But her frantic defense of Robert planted a terrible seed of doubt. What would Robert do to us if challenged through official channels? I had to find a different way, a call that was powerful, but strategic and unseen. I knew if I couldn't attack him directly, I had to attack the pillars holding him up, his reputation and his wealth. Sitting alone in my home office the next morning, I stared at the photo I took of Leo's reaction, hardening my resolve. I picked up the phone again, making a secret call. I spoke in hushed, determined tones. It's me. I need a massive favor. No, not a big one. A necessary one. I need everything you have on Robert Ashworth. Financial dealings, social secrets, everything that's not visible on the surface. Yes, the sooner the better. This is for my son. The person on the other end of the line wasn't family, wasn't a friend. They were a secret asset I had acquired years ago, when Robert Ashworth had tried to use his influence to destroy my small business. I thought I'd never use that contact again. But now, it was Leo's shield. For a brief moment, I felt a terrible kind of hope. The secret investigation was underway. Maybe I could expose Robert quietly, cleanly, without shattering Sarah's world entirely. Maybe I could protect everyone. A few days later, Sarah brought up the subject over dinner, trying to sound normal, while Leo drew pictures nearby. Dad called. He wants us to come next Sunday. He said he regrets the misunderstanding with Leo. Misunderstanding. That word was chilling. It was Robert's attempt at an apologia controlling move to reestablish dominance, to make us pretend his terrifying action never happened. I looked at Sarah, my face set. We're not going next Sunday. Her eyes went wide with panic. Greg, you can't refuse him. It's going to make things so much worse. You don't understand the Ashworths. She was terrified of his visible anger, but I was terrified of his power. I had cut the first wire by refusing his command, and I knew Robert would feel the sudden, quiet change in the atmosphere. He would know a threat was coming, even if he didn't know who was holding the knife. What evidence would my secret contact uncover that was strong enough to bring down the impenetrable fortress of Robert Ashworth's reputation? I knew the refusal, the simple act of saying no to Sunday dinner, would be interpreted by Robert not as disobedience, but as a direct challenge. And in the world of Robert Ashworth, challenges were met with swift, cold countermeasures. The next few days were defined by silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy and watchful. I had a false sense of hope because the immediate threat of confronting Robert had passed, and my private investigation was underway. I convinced myself that if I could get the evidence first, I could protect Leo and Sarah simultaneously. But peace was a luxury Robert never allowed his adversaries. The first strike came not through a heated phone call, but through a seemingly innocent, calculated approach. I run a small, specialized architectural consulting firm. It's my passion, and I've built it up through years of grueling work. On Wednesday, my business partner, Mark, called me into his office, his face pale and stressed. Greg, there's a problem, Mark said, fiddling nervously with a pencil. The Ashworth Group just called our primary backer, Mr. Davies. They didn't threaten him, exactly. They just expressed deep concern about our firm's long-term stability. Concern. What does that even mean? I asked, my blood turning cold. It means Robert Ashworth made an extremely subtle suggestion that my future investment might be safer elsewhere. It wasn't a threat. It was a friendly warning, delivered with the weight of his entire financial empire behind it. Davies is spooked. He asked us to pause all current projects until we can resolve this unusual uncertainty. This was conflict escalation, delivered in the most sophisticated, devastating way possible. Robert wasn't using brute force. He was using his influence to choke the life out of my career, my livelihood, my independence. He was trying to dismantle my ability to protect Leo by dismantling my future. I called Sarah immediately. I was furious, and I couldn't hide it. Your father just interfered with my business, Sarah. He didn't scream. He didn't send a lawyer. He just whispered concern, and now my firm is on life support. You need to talk to him. Tell him to stop this. Sarah's reaction was exactly what I feared. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, but not with empathy for my situation. I can't, I told you, Gray. I tried to tell you what would happen if you challenged him. You should have just gone to dinner. You think this is bad? This is just the beginning. He's trying to protect the family, and you're tearing it apart. Her words were a complete inversion of reality. He was tearing us apart. He had terrified our son. Yet, in her mind, I was the agent of destruction simply for trying to stand up for my child. The suspicion I felt in part to cement it into a bitter, painful truth. Sarah saw her father as a necessary evil, and she would always choose the security of the Ashworth name over my fight for justice. That conversation was a profound moment of realization. Sarah was gone, swallowed by her father's control. I was truly alone in this fight. The soft sound of my phone buzzing on the desk interrupted my despair. It was the Contact Me secret asset with a message. Initial findings confirmed. Much deeper than expected. Need to meet immediately. My heart hammered against my ribs. Robert's concern had just cost me my business stability. What had he been hiding all these years that was so much deeper that it required this level of quiet aggression to conceal? The conflict had escalated, and now I was about to find out exactly what I was up against. The message from my contact, cryptic and urgent, felt like a lifeline thrown into a raging storm. Robert's concern had successfully frozen my business, making my meeting with the asset even riskier, but infinitely more necessary. I told Sarah I had an unexpected emergency with a distant client, another lie I had to tell to protect the truth. We met in a small, anonymous coffee shop miles away from my office. My contact, a sharp, discreet woman named Clara, didn't waste time on pleasantries. She slid a thin, encrypted tablet across the table. This is everything I could pull together in 3 days, Clara said, her voice low. It's complex, Greg. Robert Ashworth doesn't just run a successful real estate empire. He runs an old network. I opened the tablet, my fingers trembling slightly. The initial conflict had been Leo. Now I was deep in Robert's world of secrets. The files weren't about minor tax fraud or typical corporate maneuvering. They revealed a pattern of behavior that was calculated and decades old. Clara pointed to a series of financial ledgers. Look at these shell corporations. They aren't for hiding profits. They're for suppressing evidence. Specifically, evidence related to land acquisitions 2 decades ago, tied to several high-profile bankruptcies and one specific legal case that vanished from the public record. My mind flashed back to the way Robert had instilled terror in Leah Precise, cold and utterly dominant. This wasn't just a powerful man being protective of his business. This was a powerful man who made sure that when people got in his way, they didn't just lose money, they lost everything, including their voice. What legal case? I asked, feeling a terrible sense of foreboding. A few people stood up to him over a major land deal. They lost, horribly. But the interesting thing is, this name, Clara scrolled down to highlight a blurry photo and a name, Alistair Vance. Vance was the lead plaintiff, a successful man, a strong opponent. But when Robert was finished with him, Vance's reputation, his business, his entire family were left in ruins. And then Vance disappeared. This was a betrayal, realized not just against me, but a pattern of betrayal against anyone who dared cross the Ashworth family. Robert didn't just win, he erased. And the most chilling detail was that the firm that handled all the legal maneuvering to silence Vance and bury the details was Sarah's family law firm, managed by Robert's brother. The whole family was woven into this web of control. Clara closed the tablet. This information won't stand up in court yet, Greg. It's too fragmented, but it gives you leverage. More importantly, it explains the level of immediate pressure he put on your business. He's running scared because he knows you're looking for the truth, and he has decades of dark secrets to protect. I left the cafe feeling sickened, but also empowered. Robert was not just an abusive father-in-law. He was a meticulous, ruthless operator who destroyed lives for profit. And Sarah, my wife, had grown up knowing this, living inside this world of calculated destruction. That was the ultimate betrayal, not just her silence, but her fundamental loyalty to a man capable of such cold cruelty. I had proof of his dark past, but what good was it if he could still isolate me completely? Robert hadn't just used his financial power to hit my business. He had used the fear he cultivated to create a vast, silent agreement among everyone who knew him. He was untouchable, not just by law, but by reputation. The only way to win was to expose the very core of his system. But first, I had to figure out what truly happened to Alistair Vance. Was Vance simply ruined? Or had Robert made an enemy who might still be out there, desperate for revenge? The weight of the encrypted tablet felt like a stone in my pocket. Knowing the full extent of Robert Ashworth's ruthlessness, the calculated destruction of families, like Alistair Vance's made, the small mark on Leo looked like a warning sign I had foolishly underestimated. The conflict was no longer about a slight, it was a battle against a deeply entrenched predator. I returned home late, the knowledge of Robert's past making the familiar comfort of my house feel like a trap. Sarah was waiting up for me, not with concern, but with cold, defensive anger. "Where were you, Greg?" she demanded. "Mark called me. He said the firm is unstable. He said Robert's people are asking questions. You know this is because of you. You are destroying everything we built." Her total lack of empathy for the threat to my career and her singular focus on placating her father was excruciating. I wanted to scream the truth at her, tell her about Alistair Vance, show her the ledgers, reveal the decades of careful malice, but I couldn't. She was too deep in denial, and revealing my secret investigation would put Clara, the files, and potentially Leo in greater danger. "I am stabilizing the firm, Sarah," I lied, my voice strained. "And you need to understand, Robert attacked me first. This is not about a forgotten dinner. This is about control. It's about respect." She countered, tears of frustration streaming down her face. "You challenge the man who protects our entire future? If you just apologize, if you just go to him and say you were wrong, he will stop this." Her plea for me to submit was the final, devastating confirmation of the betrayal I had felt earlier. She was choosing the oppressive safety of Robert's world over the moral foundation of our own family. The emotional distance between us was now a chasm. The pressure intensified over the next 48 hours. The unusual uncertainty that Robert had manufactured led to a significant project cancellation. My firm lost a quarter of its projected revenue in a single afternoon. The financial pain was sharp and immediate, pushing me closer to the brink of panic. Robert was showing me exactly what he meant by control. He was systematically bankrupting me to force my surrender. I called Clara, needing a progress update and a strategy. I was running out of time and resources. "They're not just closing off your finances, Greg," Clara informed me. "They've shifted focus. My sources indicate Robert's team is aggressively trying to identify who is leaking the old Vance information. He's looking for the loose thread that led you to the shell companies. The danger here isn't just financial. If he finds out you have those files, He will see you not as a defiant son-in-law, but as an existential threat. Clara explained that Robert Ashworth's success depended entirely on the absolute silence surrounding his past victims. If the truth about Alistair Vance were to surface, it could trigger a domino effect, unraveling decades of carefully concealed destruction. My business was collapsing, my marriage was in ruins, and I was now standing in the crosshairs of a powerful, ruthless man who saw me as an enemy to be erased. The only thing I had left was the memory of Leo's terrified face and the encrypted tablet containing Robert's darkest secrets. I had to accelerate my plan. I needed to find Alistair Vance. If I could bring his story to light, it would expose Robert's system of betrayal and destruction far more powerfully than any anonymous ledger. The question wasn't if Vance was still out there, but how he could be found after Robert had meticulously scrubbed him from existence. I looked at the blurry photograph of Vance, a ghost from Robert's past. I needed to bring that ghost back to life before Robert eliminated me entirely. With Robert aggressively dismantling my life, the search for Alistair Vance became my singular obsession. He was the key to exposing the Ashworth empire, the living proof of Robert's capacity for cold, sustained malice. I spent hours poring over the fragmented data Clara had provided, the old business filings, the names of defunct shell companies, and the blurry picture of Vance. It felt like searching for a single grain of sand in a vast, cold ocean. Robert had done his work too well. Vance had effectively become a ghost in the public record. My research led me to one obscure, forgotten link. A small, non-profit historical society in a coastal town 300 miles away, which Vance had been a major patron of 20 years ago, just before his disappearance. It was a faint, human thread Robert must have overlooked. I called Clara. I need you to trace this. Check any old property records or charitable donations linked to Alistair Vance in the town of Port Haven. It's a long shot, but it's the only lead I have. Clara agreed, but her tone was serious. Greg, you need to understand the magnitude of what you're uncovering. Robert didn't just financially ruin Vance. He psychologically crushed him. People like Vance don't just walk away and start over. They often disappear into isolation. If we find him, he could be unstable, and you might be walking into a different kind of danger. I understood the risk. I was dealing with broken people who had been touched by Robert's systematic destruction. But the image of Leo's terrified face provided all the motivation I needed. I had to expose the man who inflicted that fear. While Clara worked a new lead, the tension at home became suffocating. Sarah had stopped crying and moved into a stony, silent resentment. She barely spoke to me, communicating only the necessities, treating me like the active disease destroying our life. Our marriage had become an empty shell, a casualty of Robert's war of control. The betrayal was complete. Her loyalty lay solely with the source of her comfort and perceived safety. Then Clara called back. Her voice was strained. I found something. It's thin, but it's there. Vance didn't completely disappear. He changed his name and moved to Port Haven. He is living quietly, completely off-grid. But there's a problem, Greg. Robert's surveillance team is showing a sudden, intense interest in that coastal town specifically, the historical society. My blood ran cold. The revelation wasn't just that I had found Vance, but that Robert was already closing in on the same location. Robert must have realized that I was looking at his past, and he was preemptively silencing any remaining witnesses. He knows I'm getting close, I whispered. He's anticipating me. He is, Clara confirmed grimly. And this changes everything. You can't just talk to Vance now. You have to get to him first. You're racing Robert to the truth, and if Robert gets there first, Vance won't just be ruined. He'll be irrevocably silenced. The immediate threat was terrifying. But as I considered the risk of driving 300 miles into a dangerous, secretive chase, my phone rang again. It was Leo's school. My heart stopped. Mr. Walker, the voice on the line said, sounding hesitant. We just wanted to confirm that your wife, Sarah, picked up Leo early today. She said there was a family emergency and that you had authorized it. I hadn't authorized anything. Sarah was supposed to be at a friend's house. My investigation into Robert's secrets had suddenly intersected with the most immediate, personal danger imaginable. Sarah, consumed by her father's influence, had taken Leo. Was this her final, desperate move to force my surrender, or had Robert found a way to use the one thing I cherished most as a weapon? The moment I heard the school secretary confirm Sarah had picked up Leo, a cold, sickening wave of realization washed over me. This was the true disaster. Robert hadn't just attacked my business. He had used the one person who should have been my ally to take my son. I frantically tried to call Sarah, but her phone was off. I knew exactly where they would be. Sarah's instinct in any crisis was to run straight back to the strongest pillar of her life, her father's estate. She had taken Leo back to the very place where he had been terrified, hoping the fortress would offer her protection from me, the man fighting to protect him. I drove straight to the Ashworth mansion. The drive was a blur of raw fear and crushing anger. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles were white. The betrayal was no longer just an abstract concept related to old ledgers. It was concrete, devastating, and involved my child. Sarah had sacrificed her son's safety for her own comfort and loyalty to her father's toxic control. I stormed up to the massive, ornate front door. I didn't knock. I hammered until a butler opened it, his face registering a flicker of surprise before reverting to professional blankness. "I need to see Sarah and Leo right now," I demanded, stepping past him into the intimidating silence of the marble foyer. Robert Ashworth himself appeared from the shadows of the drawing room, perfectly composed, radiating icy disdain. He had successfully orchestrated the latest, most painful move in his game. "Greg," Robert said, his voice measured and dangerously calm, "I understand you're upset. Sarah is very distressed by your reckless actions. She felt she had no choice but to bring Leo here, where he is safe." "Safe," I exploded, though I kept my voice just below a shout to avoid attracting Leo. "He's not safe here. You put your hands on him last week, and now you've used my wife to kidnap him. Where is my son?" "Leo is playing upstairs," Robert replied, gesturing vaguely. "Sarah's with him. They will stay here until you decide to come to your senses, stop this absurd investigation, and respect your family." He framed it as my absurd investigation was the root of the problem, and Leo was merely collateral. He hadn't needed to threaten me physically. He had leveraged my love for my son against me. "If you think for 1 minute taking my son will make me stop, you are gravely mistaken, Robert. You've just given me the only reason I needed to destroy your reputation piece by piece." Robert merely smiled, a cold, mirthless expression that didn't reach his eyes. "You're penniless, Greg. Your firm is dissolving. Your wife is here, where she belongs. And you have no evidence that the world cares about. You have lost this fight. Go home." I knew fighting him physically or trying to force my way upstairs would only endanger Leo more. Robert had him caged in the fortress. I had to leave, but I was not defeated. My strategic objective had changed instantly. I now had two overwhelming, concurrent disasters. Leo was being held in Robert's mansion, and Robert was actively hunting Alistair Vance. If I paused my search to try and retrieve Leo legally, Robert would find Vance and eliminate the only leverage I had. If I rushed to Port Haven, Leo would remain trapped. I had to choose. Do I prioritize the immediate extraction of my son, or the acquisition of the evidence needed to end Robert's control forever? Leaving the Ashworth mansion without Leo felt like tearing a piece of my own soul out. But Robert's arrogance had given me a crucial piece of information. Leo was safe, for now. Robert wouldn't harm Leo physically. He would use him as the emotional leverage to force my total surrender. My new mission was clear. I had to get the evidence from Vance before Robert could silence him, because that evidence was Leo's only real key to freedom. Without it, Robert would win, and Leo would be trapped in that gilded cage permanently. I drove straight to Clara's hideout, a small, secure apartment she used for sensitive work. I briefed her on Sarah's devastating betrayal and Leo's new status as a hostage. Robert thinks he has one, I stated, pacing the small room. He thinks I'm a broken man who will crumble now that Leo is in his hands. He's wrong. We are going to Port Haven tonight. He's chasing Vance. If we get there first, the game changes. Clara looked at me, her expression a mix of caution and grim admiration. This is a suicide run, Greg. If Robert's surveillance team sees you near Vance, you go from being an annoyance to a target. He will know you have the ledger information. He already sees me as a target, I countered, running a tired hand through my hair. He's trying to bankrupt me, and he has my son. We have nothing left to lose. This was the core of my revenge plan. Use Robert's own past to destroy his present. We drove through the night. The journey was long and silent, broken only by the occasional update from Clara's hidden channels, confirming Robert's security detail was indeed moving towards the coast. As we neared Port Haven, Clara brought up the final, chilling detail about the Vance case. I dug deeper into the original land deal. The people Robert targeted weren't just random businessmen. Vance and the other plaintiffs were fighting Robert because his acquisition would have led to the demolition of a small, vital community center for local families, a center they had personally funded. Robert hadn't just profited from the land, he had profited from destroying a place of genuine goodwill. This cemented the depth of his calculated cruelty. We found a secluded, weathered house where Alistair Vance, now living under an assumed name, was hiding. He was an older man, gaunt and haunted, looking nothing like the confident businessman in the old photo. His home was barren, devoid of color or comfort. Robert's ruin of him was absolute. I sat opposite him, showing him the blurry photo and the shell company names. My name is Greg Walker. I know what Robert Ashworth did to you 20 years ago. He is hunting you right now. He knows I am close to the truth. I need your testimony, Mr. Vance. I need proof to bring him down, or he will continue to destroy lives, including my son's. Vance listened, his eyes flickering with ancient pain and terror. He had spent 2 decades hiding. The thought of confronting Robert again was clearly devastating. You're too late, Vance whispered, his voice dry and fragile. I felt my heart sink. Had Robert's people reached him already? Was the evidence destroyed? Vance pointed weakly to a small, hidden safe built into the wall. They didn't get the keypiece. The one thing he spent 20 years trying to bury? It's not a ledger. It's not a contract. He paused, a single tear tracking down his cheek. It's a recording. A detailed audio file of Robert Ashworth admitting his full culpability in the destruction of my business. And, far worse, his direct order to falsify documents that led to the death of the one person who tried to stop him legally, his own lead attorney. This was the unexpected, devastating twist. Robert hadn't just ruined a family. He had orchestrated a fatality and buried it under his empire, and the victim was someone on his own side. My revenge plan had just shifted from exposing a financial predator to exposing a criminal who had hidden the death for 2 decades. The stakes were now unimaginably high. The revelation that Robert Ashworth had been responsible for the intentional destruction of his own lawyer, hidden for 20 years, was not just a twisted, was the absolute leverage I needed. This wasn't just corporate ruthlessness. This was a chilling, cold-blooded act that elevated the stakes beyond anything Robert could control with money. Alistair Vance, trembling but resolute, retrieved a small, sealed digital storage drive from the safe. This is the only copy. I kept it safe, knowing that one day, someone might be desperate enough to fight him. Be careful, Greg. If he finds out you have this, you won't just be ruined. You will be erased. Clara quickly transferred the file to a secure cloud server, creating multiple backups. We didn't listen to the entire file. Vance's fractured description of the contents, Robert's calm, detailed admission of the cover-up and his role in the attorney's fate was enough to confirm its lethal value. As the data transfer completed, the chilling silence of Vance's secluded home was broken by the sound of approaching vehicles. heavy, purposeful, and unmistakable. Robert's team, Clara breathed, her face going pale. They found us. Robert's surveillance must have followed our digital footprints to Port Haven. We were mere seconds ahead of his people. Vance, you have to come with us, I urged. Vance shook his head, his eyes full of fear, but also a strange, weary peace. No, I've spent 20 years hiding. I can't run anymore. This is my ending. You have the truth? Go. Save your son? That's the only justice I need. We made a split-second decision. We couldn't force him, and slowing down to argue would mean capture. Clara and I slipped out the back entrance and raced towards our car. Just as we pulled onto the main road, we saw the dark, unmarked SUVs, swarming Vance's small, isolated house. Robert's attempt to silence the ghosts had begun. I felt sick with worry for Vance, but I knew I couldn't stop. I had to focus on the fire in my hands, the digital key that would free Leo. The drive back was a blur of high-speed tension. Every car seemed like a threat. Every shadow held a potential danger. I didn't care about my collapsing business anymore. I didn't care about my shattered reputation. My entire focus was the confrontation. The moment I would walk back into Robert's mansion and use his darkest secret against him, Clara.com, despite the peril, laid out the final strategy. We can't just give this to the police. Robert would bury it in legal maneuvers. We need to make this public immediately, forcing his hand. We need a controlled detonation. My mind, however, was focused on one thing. Sarah. She needed to see the truth, not through my angry words, but through Robert's own damning audio. She needed to understand the true cost of her loyalty to him. We arrived back in the city just before dawn. I dropped Clara off at a secure, undisclosed location with the mandate to prepare the controlled detonation and stood outside my own home, the home Sarah had abandoned. I retrieved a few items, including the one thing I knew would cut through Sarah's denial, a small, portable speaker. I drove back to the fortress. This time, I didn't hammer on the door. I walked in, quiet and deliberate. The butler tried to stop me, but I brushed past him, marching straight toward the drawing room where I knew Robert would be. The confrontation was about to begin. But before I faced Robert, I had to face the deeper, colder reality of my broken family. I knew Leo was upstairs, and I saw Sarah standing at the foot of the sweeping staircase, her face pale, her eyes filled with fear and anger. I looked at her, and the words I planned to use against Robert died in my throat. I had the power to destroy her entire family, but first, I needed her to hear the truth about the man she protected. The ultimate confrontation began not with Robert, but with the woman who betrayed me. I stood at the foot of the sweeping staircase, facing Sarah. The opulent mansion was silent, the silence broken only by the rapid beating of my own heart. This wasn't the police raid or the corporate shaming I had planned. This was raw, family-shattering truth. Sarah looked at me, her posture rigid with self-righteous anger. How dare you come back here, Greg? You're ruining everything. My father is trying to fix the chaos you caused, and you just keep attacking us. This isn't about me, Sarah. This is about who your father really is. I said, my voice low and steady, drained of fury, but saturated with devastating certainty. You believe he's protecting you, but you've been living inside his lie for years. I didn't argue. Argument was useless against her ingrained loyalty. I simply pulled out the small, portable speaker and the digital drive containing Alistair Vance's recording. You need to hear this, I told her. This is the truth about the man you're protecting, the man who put his hand on our son, the man who is dismantling my life. Robert must have heard the disturbance, because the doors to the drawing room opened and he emerged, stern and composed. He saw the tension between us, and then he saw the small electronic device in my hand. His cold composure fractured for a fraction of a second. He knew instantly that I had brought a weapon far more dangerous than any lawyer. Greg, get out of my house, Robert commanded, his voice hardening into a dangerous threat. You have overstepped. Now leave, or I will have you removed." I ignored him, keeping my focus entirely on Sarah, whose eyes were wide with a mix of defiance and rising dread. I pushed the play button. The drawing room filled with the chilling, crystal clear voice of a younger Robert Ashworth, calm and matter-of-fact, discussing far more than just financial maneuvering. The recording detailed his ruthless strategy to destroy Alistair Vance's life, not just for the land, but as an example. But then, the recording twisted into something far darker, something Sarah had never imagined. We heard Robert discussing the necessary management of his lead attorney, a man who had suddenly become inconvenient after discovering the extent of the cover-up. The voice was smooth, detached, and utterly chilling as he casually gave the instruction to falsify documents that would lead to the man's financial ruin and, critically, his inescapable downfall. It wasn't an explicit description of a crime, but the calm, undeniable tone of a man orchestrating a complete eradication of cold, calculated action that directly resulted in a professional's demise. Sarah's face went white. She didn't look at me. She looked straight at her father. Her denial, her structured world of safety and privilege, was collapsing around her ears. This was not the respectable, stern patriarch she knew. This was a man capable of sustained, clinical cruelty, even against his own employees. Robert, his face thunderous, finally moved. He lunged toward the speaker, his entire body rigid with fury and panic. "Turn that off now," he roared, the mask of controlled authority utterly gone. I snatched the speaker back just as his hand swiped past it. The audio kept playing, a low, devastating drone in the silent mansion. Sarah was crying now, not the frustrated tears of part 3, but gut-wrenching sobs of absolute horror. She finally saw the man she had been protecting and the monstrous lie she had been living. The betrayal was complete, but now it was her own betrayal of her conscience she was confronting. Robert knew I had him cornered. The confrontation was over. The revenge plan could now begin in earnest. But as I turned to him, ready to lay out my terms, he took a step back, his eyes narrowing with a dangerous, icy calculation. He knew I had the evidence, but he still had my son. What terrible, final move was Robert planning now that he knew his life's darkest secret was exposed? The drawing room was a scene of devastation. Robert, his face a mask of cold fury, stood defeated but not yet broken. Sarah leaned against the staircase, silent tears streaming down her face, finally shattered by the horror of her father's recorded confession. The confrontation was complete. The revenge plan was now a negotiation for survival. I shut off the recording. The silence that followed was heavier than the audio. "You lose, Robert," I stated, walking slowly toward him. "That recording is backed up and securely held by people who know exactly what it is. If I disappear, if my son is harmed, if anything happens to my business, that recording goes public." Today, Robert composed himself, the mask of the powerful businessman slowly clicking back into place. But his eyes betrayed a desperate, lethal intelligence. "You want money, Greg? I will pay you any amount to forget this foolishness. You can have your business back. You can have a life of comfort. I don't want your money," I countered. "I want my son, and I want justice. Not for me, but for every life you crushed, starting with Alistair Vance and that lawyer you eliminated. But first, Leo." My voice dropped to a razor-sharp whisper. "You will walk upstairs. You will tell Sarah to pack Leo's things, and you will ensure they are both in my car, driving away from this house in the next 10 minutes. If you hesitate, the first snippet of that audio goes to a national news source I've already lined up." The arrogance was gone, replaced by calculated panic. Robert knew the recording meant the end of his empire, his reputation, and likely his freedom. He looked at Sarah, who wouldn't meet his gaze. The final, definitive loss of her loyalty was clear. "You have won this round, Greg," Robert hissed. "But you will regret this." He walked heavily toward the stairs. This was the moment of success, the triumph of my dangerous, desperate plan. Leo would be safe. But just as Robert reached the landing, he paused and turned back, a sinister smile creeping onto his face, a smile that held an unpredictable, terrifying element. "You wanted justice for my attorney, didn't you, Greg?" Robert said, his voice carrying the chilling calm of a psychopath. "You wanted to expose the truth of that old case? Well, congratulations. You've already exposed the only person who was actively trying to find the truth 20 years ago. The people who truly wanted to bury that secret forever. They just saw your face on the cameras near Port Haven." My heart plummeted. Robert hadn't been the only force at play. In his attempt to hide the recording, he had inadvertently led me into the path of the people who helped him cover it up, people potentially even more ruthless and dangerous than Robert himself. Robert, the puppet master, was also a pawn in a bigger, darker game he had created. "That wasn't my team you were running from, Greg," Robert finished, leaning over the banister, his triumph restored. "That was the firm that handled the entire cover-up. They are far more discreet, far more thorough, and they don't care about your son. They only care about silence. And they know exactly who you are and that you have the tape." I was momentarily paralyzed by the shock of this terrifying countermove. My revenge had exposed me to an unknown, lethal enemy. But before I could react, Sarah slowly straightened up, her face etched with a fierce, cold determination I had never seen before. She had just realized the horrifying magnitude of her father's betrayal, not just to me, but to his own safety, and now potentially hers and Leo's. She walked up the stairs past her father, not looking at either of us. "Leo is coming with you, Greg," she said, her voice hollow and decisive. "And I'm coming too." The shock of Robert's counter move, the revelation that I had exposed myself to the original, more lethal architects of his cover-up, was eclipsed by Sarah's sudden, cold decision. Her fear had finally transcended her loyalty to her father. She was choosing survival. Robert, standing on the landing, watched us with a look of pure, calculated hatred as Sarah returned quickly with Leo, who looked confused but instantly relaxed when he saw me. We didn't exchange a single word. Leo simply buried his face in my neck, the subtle shudder I remembered from the dining room incident returning, confirming the emotional damage he'd endured in the fortress. "Get out!" Robert hissed, his voice dangerously low, his plan to leverage Leo entirely ruined. "You have your son? Now if that recording ever surfaces, I will ensure every single one of you pays the price. You have no idea who you've provoked." I knew he wasn't bluffing about the new threat. I hurried Leo and Sarah into my car. As we sped away from the Ashworth estate, the immense, oppressive house vanished into the rearview mirror. It felt less like an escape and more like a dive into the unknown. I drove straight to Clara's secure location. She was waiting, her face etched with worry. I quickly explained Robert's final, terrifying revelation. "It's worse than we thought, Clara. Robert wasn't the top of the food chain. The people who handled the cover-up of his lawyer's demise, the people who specialize in total silence, they know I have the recording, and they know my face." Clara absorbed the information, her mind already racing toward a new strategy. If Robert is cornered, he becomes a witness. His new plan will be to sell us out to the bigger players, proving his loyalty by delivering us and the evidence to them. He needs to protect himself from his former associates now, too. Sarah, who had been silent, listening to this horrifying discussion of cover-ups and professional silencing, finally spoke, her voice still brittle but clear. "The firm, it's Hawthorne and Finch. They handle the Ashwood family's most sensitive affairs. They are ruthless. They don't leave loose ends." Her knowledge was chilling. She hadn't just been a witness to Robert's world. She had been close enough to know the names of the shadows that protected him. The betrayal was over. The new partnership was cemented in mutual fear. "They're not just lawyers," Sarah continued, her eyes focused on some distant, dark memory. "They manage problems. They know everything about the family, the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities. They know my grandmother's property in the city, a tiny apartment no one uses. They won't look for us there. we can hide, a decision was made. We needed to disappear entirely, to move from offensive to defensive. The revenge plan now had a critical, time-sensitive first step: survival. We drove to the small, forgotten apartment. As I tucked Leo into a borrowed bed, finally feeling the first moment of relief since he was taken, I knew this wasn't the end. Robert was a caged animal, and the true predators, Hawthorne and Finch, were hunting. They were meticulous, unseen, and they specialized in making problems vanish. My confrontation with Robert was merely the signal for a far deadlier chase. I had the evidence, the truth, but I was now being hunted by people who understood power and silence better than anyone. I had to use the recording, my ultimate weapon, strategically, before they found a way to take me and the truth out of the game permanently. The forgotten apartment was our new headquarters, a dusty, silent sanctuary where we could finally breathe and plan. Leo was upstairs, drawing quietly, blissfully unaware of the financial predators and the ruthless law firm hunting his father. With Robert neutralized as the primary threat and Sarah now a cold, determined ally, the focus shifted entirely to the new enemy, Hawthorne and Finch. They were methodical. It would be systematically tracking down every connection I had. We had to move the truth out of the shadows before they could manage the silence. Clara, Sarah, and I sat around a battered kitchen table. The atmosphere was tight, charged with strategic urgency. Robert's final move was brilliant in its cruelty, Clara admitted. Tapping on the secure drive containing the recording, he exposed us to the people who genuinely bury bodies, not just careers. Our only defense is the recording itself. We have to release it simultaneously to multiple, untouchable sources so they can't suppress it. Sarah's insight was crucial here. She understood the internal workings of the Ashworth-Hawthorne alliance. If we just release the audio, they'll call it a deep fake, discredit Vance, and use their legal weight to stop publication. We need context. We need a secondary detonation. Her suggestion was chillingly effective. Robert was due to give a major, high-profile keynote address at a prestigious financial summit in 2 days. An event designed to showcase the continued strength and respectability of the Ashworth Empire. We don't just leak the recording, Sarah explained, her voice devoid of emotion. We leaked the recording during his speech. The contrast will be undeniable. The respectable financial patriarch, mid-speech, is exposed as a creditor who covered up a fatality. This was the refined revenge plan, a public, simultaneous execution designed to achieve maximum impact and bypass the legal suppression that Hawthorne and Finch specialized in. Clara would handle the technical side and sharing. The audio was broadcast to pre-selected media outlets and financial regulators at the exact moment. Sarah would handle the context, feeding specific, small details to a few key reporters that would validate the authenticity of the recording just hours before the summit. My job, the most dangerous part, was the final emotional punch. Robert will be prepared for a bomb threat, a legal injunction, or an arrest, I said. He won't be prepared for me. I knew the summit would be a fortress, but I also knew Robert's schedule, his routines, and the layout of the venue through Sarah's detailed knowledge of his public appearances. I wasn't going to just watch the destruction. I was going to be the visible reason for it. I needed to look Robert in the eye and watch the controlled, cold composure he valued more than anything shatter, knowing that every single loss he suffered was justice for my son. As we finalized the distribution plan, I looked at Sarah. Her eyes were hard, but the terror was gone, replaced by a steely focus. She was no longer the frightened wife. She was an Ashworth, using her knowledge to destroy the lie that had sheltered and suffocated her. What happens after this, Sarah? I asked quietly, looking at my son's door. After we detonate his world? She didn't hesitate. After this, Greg, there is no going back. We are. The day of the financial summit felt strangely calm, like the eye of a hurricane. 2 days of frantic, quiet preparation had led to this moment. Leo was safe with a trusted, anonymous sitter arranged by Clara, miles away from the city center. Sarah and I were together, but miles apart. She was working her contacts, planting the seeds of doubt about Robert's history, and I was preparing to infiltrate the summit. My infiltration was simple, leveraging the one thing Robert could never shake, my identity as his son-in-law. I didn't try to sneak past security. I walked through the main entrance, dressed in a borrowed, sharp suit, looking exactly like the minor nuisance Robert had dismissed weeks ago. The ballroom was packed with the city's financial elite, all waiting to hear the great Robert Ashworth speak about integrity and longevity in business. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. I managed to get a seat close to the stage. I checked my phone. Clara confirmed the upload was complete, the distribution network activated, and the countdown running. Sarah messaged me, "Do it for Leo." Robert took the stage. He was magnificent, composed, radiating the deceptive stability of his empire. He began his speech with practiced, self-assured charm. For 5 minutes, the audience was captivated by the sheer weight of his authority. Then, the countdown hit 0. A small, high-pitched whine began in the ballroom, the sound of an external audio source overriding the internal system. Robert frowned, pausing mid-sentence. The sound system was hijacked. Robert's smooth, commanding voice suddenly stopped, replaced by the crackle of static, followed by the chillingly detached voice of the younger Robert Ashworth, broadcast to the hundreds of powerful guests. The initial confusion in the room quickly turned to stunned silence as Robert's words took calm. Clinical discussion about managing the troublesome attorney. The specific instructions to falsify records that would guarantee professional eradication filled the grand hall. The applause meter on Robert's success had just flatlined. Robert's reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. His face, usually so controlled, went through a rapid transformation. Shock, then total, blinding panic, and finally, absolute, primal rage. He wasn't looking at the audience. He was frantically looking for the source of the attack. I stood up slowly, ensuring I was the first thing he saw when his eyes scanned the room. He saw me, and every ounce of his hatred focused on my face. The look he gave me was colder, darker, and more lethal than the terror he had inflicted on Leo. In that moment, he understood everything. The refusal to attend dinner, the investigation, Vance, the confrontation, and Sarah's betrayal, all leading to this public, irreversible execution of his reputation. The chaos erupted. People were whispering, checking their phones where the full audio file was now circulating, accompanied by Clara's strategically timed press releases. The carefully constructed facade of the Ashworth Empire was splintering under the pressure of Robert's own recorded malice. Security swarmed the stage, not to protect Robert, but to figure out how to cut the hijacked audio. Robert, abandoning the podium, staggered back. He looked like a man watching his entire life, his power, his standing, his carefully concealed criminal past, burst into flames in front of him. I had witnessed his immediate, crushing loss of control. Justice was served, but it came with a terrible realization. Robert Ashworth was now a desperately dangerous, cornered man. I had executed my revenge, but I hadn't destroyed the deeper threat. As the recording finally cut out, and the room descended into frantic noise, I knew the immediate danger was over, but the long game had just begun. Robert was ruined, but what desperate and destructive final move would he make before he was fully taken down? I slipped out of the chaotic ballroom as security finally wrestled control of the sound system. The revenge was complete. Robert Ashworth was no longer an untouchable patriarch. He was a disgraced criminal, exposed to the world by his own voice. I met Clara outside the venue. Her expression was triumphant, but wary. "It's done, Greg. The audio is viral. The regulators are already moving on the old land deals. The financial world is in shock. His empire is unraveling in real time. The immediate threat from Robert was gone. His reputation and legal freedom were the priorities now, not the pursuit of me. He was facing total devastation. I drove back to the small apartment. Sarah was waiting, watching the news reports that were dissecting her father's life and legacy. She looked exhausted, but a profound, cold calm had settled over her. The years of denial were finally purged. "It's over, Sarah," I said softly. "No, Greg. The lie is over," she corrected, her eyes filled with a weary sadness. "I spoke to the authorities this afternoon. I gave them details about the Hawthorne and Finch firm to shell accounts, the dates Robert used them for the cover-up. I've done everything I can to help them dismantle what they built." She had fully crossed the line. Her actions, born out of profound betrayal and fear, were now steps toward genuine justice. The next few days were defined by the rapid collapse of the Ashworth world. Robert was taken into custody pending a full investigation into the financial fraud and the death of his former attorney. The sheer weight of the audio evidence, corroborated quickly by the leads Clara and Sarah provided, made the case undeniable. The powerful fortress had crumbled. The emotional aftermath was heavier. I sat with Leo, watching him finally draw pictures with brighter colors, the deep shadow in his eyes slowly receding. The fact that the man who instilled that fear was now powerless brought a huge wave of relief, a satisfaction that was deeper than any financial victory. But the most complex change was Sarah. She was no longer the wife I had married, the woman blinded by wealth and loyalty. The woman sitting next to me was hardened, marked by the knowledge of her family's dark secrets. "I can't go back to the way things were, Greg," Sarah admitted one evening, looking out the window at the anonymous city skyline. "I spent my entire life protecting a lie. I was blind to the cruelty because I enjoyed the comfort. The things I did letting him take Liao, can never truly forgive myself for that. I need time to figure out who I am without the Ashworth name, without the control." The truth was, the marriage was irreparably broken by her actions and her years of willful ignorance. Our fight for Leo had brought us to a shared purpose, but it hadn't repaired the vast chasm of betrayal that had opened between us. We agreed on the difficult path forward, a separation, focusing entirely on Leo's recovery and co-parenting him away from the influence of the Ashworth name. Our victory was achieved, but the family we fought to save was permanently altered. My business was recovering, thanks to the public scrutiny of Robert, which ironically cleared my name and attracted new, ethical partners. His financial safety was returning, but the most satisfying result was the silence in Leo's room, a silence of peace, not fear. The path to victory had cost me my marriage, but it had won back my son's safety and shattered the monster who threatened him. I had achieved justice, but there was one final, necessary act to truly close this chapter, ensuring Robert's destruction was complete and meaningful. Weeks passed. Robert Ashworth was formally charged with multiple counts of fraud and obstruction of justice related to the fate of his former attorney. The evidence was overwhelming, and his bail was set impossibly high, ensuring he remained in custody. The media storm eventually subsided, replaced by the quiet, grinding mechanism of the legal system. The Ashworth empire was being dismantled by receivership, piece by piece. The fortress was finally empty. I requested a visit to Robert in the detention facility. It wasn't to gloat, though the satisfaction was immense. It was a necessary final step for my own closure, a way to definitively close the door on the terror he had inflicted on my son. The visitation room was sterile and cold, a stark contrast to the opulence of his drawing room. Robert was dressed in a standard-issue uniform, the expensive suit replaced by rough cotton. He looked older, smaller, and his eyes held a new, chilling emptiness, but the arrogance still lingered beneath the surface. "I suppose you're here for the final victory lap, Greg," Robert sneered, his voice hoarse from disuse. "I'm here to confirm two things," I replied, sitting opposite him. "First, Leo is safe. He's happy. The fear you put in him is finally fading. You lost that battle the moment you laid a hand on him." Robert merely scoffed, refusing to acknowledge the depth of his cruelty. "He's a child, Greg. He'll forget. And you destroyed your own life to win a moral point. You lost your marriage. You risked your career. What did you gain? I gained back my conscience, Robert, and I gained true independence, I said, looking him straight in the eye. But I came here for the second thing. I came to tell you the final cost of your actions. I leaned forward. The Hawthorne and Finch firm, your protectors, they immediately turned on you. They offered up every detail of your culpability in the old case to shell companies, the falsified records, everything in exchange for their own immunity. They sacrificed you to save their firm. You weren't a patriarch to them. You were just a liability and a witness. Robert's face, which had been set in scorn, finally broke. The betrayal from his own sophisticated allies, the very people he paid to maintain his illusion of control, was the final, devastating blow. His power relied on loyalty and fear, and in the end, he had neither. He was abandoned, alone, and facing the consequences of decades of calculated cruelty. You have nothing left, Robert, I concluded quietly. No power, no prestige, no protection. Sarah is giving them everything they need. Your entire legacy is being erased. And it all started because you couldn't control your rage against a 5-year-old boy. I rose to leave. I saw not a powerful enemy anymore, but a broken, pathetic man finally facing the devastating reality of his isolation. The satisfaction wasn't in his misery, but in the knowledge that he could never inflict that fear again. I didn't need to hurt you, Robert. I just needed to tell the truth. And the truth, it turns out, is the strongest weapon against a lie as big as yours. As the guard led me out, I looked back once. Robert was sitting utterly still, staring at the empty wall, a prisoner not just of the facility, but of his own terrible past. The empty throne of the Ashworth Empire was finally silent. My son was free, but the story wasn't quite finished. I still had to ensure the emotional well-being of the one person who risked everything to help me. Sarah. The dust settled, and the silence that followed the storm was the most satisfying outcome of all. With Robert Ashworth irrevocably facing the consequences of his decades of cruelty, the pervasive fear that had clouded our lives finally lifted. The empty throne was truly gone. My focus turned entirely to building a new foundation for Leo. We moved out of the city, away from the shadows of the Ashworth name and the opulence that had masked so much darkness. We found a small house near the coast, reminiscent of the quiet area where Alistair Vance had tried to find peace. Here, Leo began to truly heal. The subtle shudder, the anxious silences, they faded, replaced by the natural, messy joy of a 5-year-old boy. He started drawing sunshine again, instead of just dark, heavy figures. Sarah and I followed through with our decision to separate. It was the hardest consequence of the entire journey, but also the most honest. The woman who left Robert's mansion was a stranger to the woman I married, and the betrayal, though motivated by fear, was a wound too deep to fully mend. Yet, we managed to forge a respectful, cooperative, co-parenting relationship. The shared purpose of protecting Leo was the only thing that remained of our bond, and it was enough. Sarah took time away, finding work in a smaller firm focused on ethical corporate law, dedicating her life to dismantling the very kind of secrecy her father championed. She had to rebuild her life from the ground up, based on her own moral compass, not his controlling wealth. She was paying her own emotional price, but she was finally free. Clara, my secret asset and unexpected ally, became a trusted friend. Her professionalism and courage had been instrumental. She taught me that true power isn't about wealth or reputation, but about knowing where the vulnerabilities lie and having the courage to exploit them for justice. My business recovered and thrived. The public knowledge that I had chosen justice over silence, integrity over capitulation, attracted clients who valued honesty. I realized that Robert's attempt to bankrupt me had actually liberated me, forcing me to value my independence and Leo's safety above all material gain. The final emotional punch came not from the confrontation, but from a quiet afternoon with Leo. We were sitting on the beach, watching the waves. Leo pointed to the water. "Dad," he said, his voice bright and clear, "the waves can't hurt us here, right?" No, buddy, I replied, pulling him close. They can't hurt us here. We're safe. He paused, then added, Grandpa Robert can't make things scary anymore. That simple, clear statement from my son was the ultimate closure. It was the definitive proof that every risk, every lie, every desperate move I had made was worth it. I had faced a monster, not with violence, but with truth. And I had won back the most precious thing in the world, my son's peace. Like the video, turn on notifications, subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring even more powerful stories to life. Thanks for watching, and remember, every betrayal writes a story. Every story deserves justice.